Black Reconstruction's W.E.B. Du Bois's first work. His debut book. Okay. Oh, it's time to start. My bad, everybody. I was looking up some stuff. All right, let's get started. All right, the white proletariat in Alabama, Georgia, and Florida. Let's see what Du Bois says in this chapter. All right. How in those southern states where black people formed a minority where ensued strife between planters, poor whites, black people, and carpetbaggers, which after varying forms of alliances finally ended in the subjection of black labor. Hold on a second, make sure I have everything turned up. Yeah, all right. We have studied Reconstruction in 3 states where the preponderance of black population and the political party which it played during Reconstruction makes it fair to say that black people during part of the time exercised a considerable dictatorship over the state government of South Carolina, Mississippi, and Louisiana. In these states, the material for studying and participation of black people in Reconstruction is large, although by no means complete. We now come to states where the black population is large, but where from the beginning the political influence of black people was comparatively small. In Virginia, North Carolina, Alabama, Georgia, Arkansas, Texas, and the border states, the interests of black labor were never in an ascendant, but from the first there was a battle between carpetbaggers and planters to control white and black labor. From a time the ancient breach between planters and poor whites gave control to carpetbaggers and scallywags, supported by black people. But war and poverty had depleted the only planter families, and some poor whites eager for land and profits and jealous of black people come to join the planters. They gradually drove the carpetbaggers to the wall and took forcible control of labor of color with the help of the whole labor vote, which they controlled. The carpetbaggers made the hardest fight in North Carolina, Alabama, and Georgia. Alabama had 65,451 whites when it entered the Union in 1820, and 42,450 black people. By 1860, there was 526,271 whites and 437,770 black people. There were competition for appointments to the provisional governorship of Alabama, but Lew E. Pearson was appointed June 1st, 1865. He called an election for the convention based on white suffrage. The convention in September admitted that, quote, the institution of slavery has been destroyed in the state of Alabama. Not anymore. And adjourned September 30th. And the legislature met November 20th. This legislature adopted the 13th Amendment, quote, with the understanding that it does not confer upon Congress the power to legislate upon the political status of freemen in this state. The black codes adopted by the legislature was one of the most severe in the South. Most of these laws, however, were voted by Governor R.M. Patton, who saw the reaction in the North and was trying to keep in careful touch with Washington. He warned the lawmakers that black people was at work and that such severe legislation was not needed. Patton said with regard to these bills, I have carefully examined the laws which under this bill would be applied to the freemen, and I think, yes, Kami, that the mere recital of some of these provisions will show the impolicy and injustice of enforcing upon black people in their new conditions. Oops, stop doing that. Finally, the code contained the unusual provision of vagrancy, apprenticeship, inciting labor. Oh, yeah. enticing labor, etc. Is enticing everybody, enticing. But was drawn. Wait, what's going on? Mid. Okay. Hey, what's this say? Let me see what he said. What's mid? Sorry, but I'd rather own my family's business. Okay, fine. Then move on. Move on. Then go on. I don't know why you're here, Boston. The final code contained the usual provisions of vagrancy, apprenticeship, enticing labor, etc., but was drawn without obvious color discrimination, although there naturally was that in fact. The chief characteristics of Reconstruction in Alabama was the direct fight for mastery between the poor whites and the planters. The poor whites of Alabama were largely segregated in a northern part of the state. A correspondent of the Nation who traveled among them in August 1865 and said, "They are ignorant and vindictive, live in poor huts, drink much, and all use tobacco and snuff. They want to organize and receive recognition by the United States government. And in order to get revenge, really want to be bushwhackers. Supported by the federal government, they, quote, wish to have the power to hang, shoot, and destroy in retaliation for the wrongs they have endured. They hate the, quote, big N-word holders, who they accused of bringing on the war and who they are afraid would get into power again. They are the refugee, quote unquote, poor white element of low character and shiftless with no ambition. The poor whites won their first victory after the Constitution of 1865, when the law was passed providing for the census in 1866 and for a proportionment of senators and representatives according to white population. The delegates from the white counties of the North and Southeast Alabama voted in favor of this, and 30 white delegates from the Black Belt voted against it. This measure destroyed the political power of the Black Belt, and if the Johnson government had survived, the state would have been ruled by the white counties instead of by the black counties, and the planters were thus thrown into involuntary alliances with black labor, and the matter of black suffrage was discussed. The planters were sure they could control the black vote, while poor white merchants and farmers opposed the black vote. Brooks, once president of the Secession Convention of 1861 and a brother of Billy Brooks of South Carolina, who nearly killed Sumner, introduced a bill in the lower house providing for the qualified black suffrage based on education and property. He represented Loudon County in the Black Belt. This bill was endorsed by Governor Patton and Judge Goldthwaite. But there were two difficulties. First, the unbending opposition of the triumph poor whites, and secondly, the suspicion of the planters themselves that their ability to dictate to black people was not so certain. The movement did not get far. From 1865 to 1868, and even later, there was, for all practicable purposes, over the greater part of the people of Alabama. No government, not all. From 1865 to 1874, government and respect for government were weakened to a degree from which it was not yet recovered. The people governed themselves extra legally and have not recovered from the practice. In 1866, black people held a convention in Mobile and complained of lawless aggression and the refusal of the legislature to receive their petition. There was continual fear of insurrection in the Black Belt. This vague fear increased towards Christmas 1866, and the black people were disappointed because of the delayed division of land. There was a natural desire to get possession of firearms, and all through the summer and fall, they were acquiring shotguns, muskets, and pistols in great quantities. In several instances, The civil authorities, backed by militias, searched black houses for weapons and sometimes found supplies which were confiscated. The financial conditions of Alabama was difficult. There was not only loss of slaves, destruction, and deterioration of property, but the cotton tax and war confiscation fell heavily on this cotton section. The cotton spirited away by thieves and confiscated by the government would have paid several times over all the expenses of the Army and the Freedmen's Bureau during the entire time of the occupation. Many times as such money was taken from black people, black tenants, in the form of his cotton tax, as was spent in aiding him. At the end of the war, at least 5,000 Northern men were in Alabama engaging in trade and farming. They brought with them a good deal of capital. This is cotton was selling for 50 cents to 40 cents to 50 cents a pound. They naturally expected to make large profits. After the Reconstruction laws, these capitalists sought to control the labor vote. Encouraged by them, the black people called a convention in Mobile, which met in May 1867. The convention declared itself in favor of the party of the new capitalists and asked protection in their civil rights and school supported by a property tax. They declared that it was an undeniable right of black people to hold office, sit on juries, ride in public conveyance, and list and visit places of public amusement. That same month, Senator Henry Wilson of Massachusetts made a political speech in Montgomery to a great crowd of black and white people. He made a plea for cooperation between whites and black people. The Confederates objected that this could lead to a union of alien capitalists and people of color, and the state thus would be taken out of the control of natives. Later, May 14th, when Judge Kelly of Pennsylvania tried to speak in Mobile, there was a race riot. General Polk wrote in 1876 from Alabama, "It may be safely said that the marvelous progress made in the education of these people, aided by the noble charitable contributions of the Northern societies and individuals, found no parallel in the history of mankind. If continued, it must be by the same means, and if the masses of the white people exhibit the same disposition to be educated, that they do not now 5 years will have transferred intelligence in education so far as the masses are concerned to the people of color in this district." His district included Georgia, Florida, Alabama, and Mississippi. On July, General Clinton formed the Conservative Party of Alabama, and knowing that this represented, in reaction, there was a widespread desire among people of color around Montgomery to prevent the meeting of this convention. A few leading black people of color formed themselves into a special committee and resolved that they would, quote, use all the influence they had. They chose to counteract any acts of violence to the convention, end quote. The result was that the meeting was held without the fact being known that there was any movement against it. In the election under the Reconstruction laws, 61,295 black people and 104,518 whites registered, but of the whites, only 18,533 voted in favor of the convention. In the convention were 31 Northerners, of whom 18 were officials of the Freedmen's Bureau and 18 black people. The rest were Southerner whites. And Alabama black people had few educated leaders in their ranks and were, in the main, poor, arrogant, ignorant field hands because they didn't teach them anything. They didn't get education. That's the problem. Black members of the convention are noted as fellows: Ben Alexander of Greene, field hand; John Carraway of Mobile, assistant editor of the Mobile Nationalist; Thomas Diggs of Barbour, field hand; Peyton Finley, formerly doorkeeper of the house; James K. Green of Hale, a carriage driver; Ovid Gregory of Mobile, a barber; Jordan Hatcher of Dallas; Washington Johnson of Russell, field hand; L.S. Lanthan of Bullock; Tom Lee of Perry field hand, who had a reputation for moderation; Alfred Strother of Dallas; and T.J. Ripper of Lauderdale. Ripper was educated in Canada and was a man of power. Several of his proposals were embodied in the present Constitution of Alabama. Of these members, two were well educated, and one, Ripper, a national leader. About half could not write. Nevertheless, their actions, their votes, and their speeches were encouraging. They were, as in particularly all cases, conservative and willing to follow leadership. The debates touched the disenfranchisement of Confederate leaders, mixed schools, and intermarriage. Many white people at this time proposed to leave the state, but the election of 1876 in the North encouraged them especially to defeat black suffrage in several states. The majority of the scallywags were ready to revolt after finding that the carpetbag element had control of the black vote. Black people, with a few exceptions, made no unreasonable and violent demands unless urged by the carpetbaggers. The carpetbaggers, with a few extreme scallywags, were disposed to resort to extreme measures and proscriptions in order to get rid of white leaders and white majorities, and to agitate the question of social equality in order to secure black people and to drive off the scallywags. I had a water somewhere. Oh, I must have left it somewhere. Oh well. Anyways, the debate on suffrage were long, and many took part. Dustin White, formerly of Iowa, proposed that the new Constitution should be admitted former rebels to the ballot, but his resolution was voted down by a vote of 30 to 51. Some black people voted for it. Ripper proposed that the convention memorialized Congress to remove the political disabilities of those who might aid in Reconstruction. According to the plan of Congress. This was adopted, and Griffin, a radical member, was made chairman of the committee to make these recommendations. The majority report of the committee did not wish to go beyond the acts of Congress, disenfranchising former Confederates, but attempts were made to disenfranchise all Confederates above the rank of captain, and all who held any civil office anywhere. Sibby wanted to exclude from suffrage was those who had killed black people during the last 2 years, or opposed Reconstruction, or persuaded voters not to take in part of the election. It was finally settled that the addition to those disenfranchised by the Reconstruction Acts, others should be excluded for violations of the rules of war. Such persons could neither register vote, nor hold office until revealed by the vote of the General Assembly, and until they, quote, accepted the civil and political equality of men, end quote. Lee, black person, said that such a course would endanger the ratification of the Constitution, and if black people did not get their rights now, they would never get them. He wanted his rights at the courthouse and at the polls and nothing more. A person of color representative of Dallas County demanded that black people be empowered to collect pay from those who held them in slavery at the rate of $10 per month for service rendered from January 1st, 1863, the date of the Emancipation Proclamation, to May 20th, 1865. An ordinance to this effect would adopt by the vote of 53 to 31. The scallywags, as a rule, wished to prohibit intermarriage of races, and simply of Montgomery reported an ordinance that to that effect. Carway, a black person, wanted life imprisonment for any white man married to a living with a black woman. But he said it was against the Civil Rights Bill to prohibit intermarriage. Gregory, a black person of Mobile, wanted all regulation laws and customs wherein distinctions were made on the account of color or race to be abolished. Caraway succeeded in having an ordinance passed directing that church property used during slavery of people of color's congregations to be turned over to the latter. Some of the property was paid for by black slaves and held in trust for them by white trustees. Some of it had belonged to the planters, who had erected churches for the use of their slaves. Black members demanded free schools and special advantages for black people, and a few carpetbaggers spoke of a melanin influence of the old regime in keeping so many thousands in ignorance. The scallywags demanded separate schools for the races, but pressure was brought to bear, and most of them gave way. 16 of the native whites finally refused to sign the Constitution and unite in the protest against a protest against the action of convention in refusing to provide separate schools. The protest said that the Constitution agreed upon, quote, tended to the abasement and degradation of the white population of the state, because it authorized mixed schools, and because the convention had refused to prohibit the intermarriage of the races. The protest pointed out as evidence the degree in which leading white Republicans deferred to their person of color colleagues that thought the Judiciary Committee had unanimously reported a measure providing against amalgamation, yet the convention tabled it, and many members of the committee who had concurred in the report of the committee, receding from their positions, voted to lay it on the table. The Constitution was adopted by the convention by the vote of 66 to 6, 66 not voting, 26 not voting, sorry. Just before the convention adjourned, Carway, a black person, offered a resolution which was adopted stating that the Constitution was founded on justice, honesty, and civilization, and the enemies of law and order, freedom, and justice were pledged to prevent its adoption. This Constitution was afterward repudiated by the Convention of 1875, when black people had been driven from political power. Nevertheless, it was a more modern and democratic instrument than any of the preceding constitutions of the state, and the new Constitution of 1875 retained many of its provisions. On the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of February 1868, the new Constitution was to be voted on. According to the Reconstruction Act, the adoption of the Constitution required a majority of the registered vote. The Conference of Conservatives was held in Montgomery, January 1st. It was decided that as many as possible should register and then stay away from the polls. The time of voting was extended to 5 days. The Constitution received 70,812 affirmative votes of only 1,005 negative. Yet this was not a majority of the registered vote, so that the plan of the conservatives was successful. Okay, hold on a second. Get something. There we go. All right, thanks. All right. However, Congress changed the law so as to make the majority of votes cast valid for adopting the Constitution, and thus declaring it adopted. Alabama was admitted to the Union in June 25th. Only July 13th, the General Assembly convened. The Fourth Amendment was ratified, and William H. Smith selected governor. The legislature held 3 sessions during 1868. on July 13th, September 16th, and November 6th. Second, there were 26 black people in the House and one in the Senate. One of the first things that the legislator did by means of black vote was to relieve the disabilities of those disenfranchised by the state constitution. In 1869, a general state system of schools was put into operations. The private schools of Mobile merged into the system. November 25th, the 15th Amendment was ratified. At the beginning of the Reconstruction government, the debt of the state was $8,355,683. At the first session of the legislature, there was no important legislation, but at the second session of the legislation, when previous customs of Alabama, the aided railroads, was taken up, and the aid increased from $12,000 to $16,000 a mile. Dollars. Yeah. The argument was that under the old law, capitalists cannot be been attracted, but that now they could come in. Under this law, there was a good deal of waste of money through railroads failing to complete building for which they had been paid. These railroad acts were adopted by votes of men of both parties. The first by the Democratic Provisional Legislature of 1867, and those of 1868 through 1879 by the Republicans. Additional aid to one railroad was opposed, and many charged of corruptions made. Railroad building increased in Alabama. In 1860, there was 743 miles. In 1887, 851 miles. In 1871 to 72, 1,697 miles were completed, with others lines in construction. The cost of the miles completed with equipment was over $60 million. One particularity of the dispute about railroad legislations during the Reconstruction is that money secured on the credit of the state was controlled and spent very largely by Southern men. The question, therefore, of the liability of the state in the future to pay such of these debts as the railway corporation did not pay, was really in most cases a question as to how far Southern people were going to conduct railroads so as to pay debts owed their own state. Thus, the large contingent railway debt of North Carolina, South Carolina, Alabama, and Georgia would not have been debts at all if Southern people had handled investments sufficiently and wisely. Yet their failure to do this enabled them to make the charge of extravagance against the carpetbaggers all the greater. Election for governor and for the lower house in the legislature was held in November 1870. Lindsay, a Democrat, was elected in November, and after some contest with the Republican incumbent, was seated. His administration was admittedly not a success, and there was as much railroad grift as ever. In 1872, Lewis, a Republican, was elected, but two bodies, one Democrat and the other Republican, both claimed to be legislator of the state. The Democrats met at the state house, and the Republicans at the United States courthouse. Both appealed to the president, and December 11th, 1872, the president submitted an unofficial plan for compromise. The Republicans finally secured a majority in both houses. In 1874, the debt included railway bonds amounted to $25,503,593. There were conflicts between white and black people during the election, but the Democrats carried all the state officers and had the majority in both houses of the legislators. A new constitution was adopted. The number of the officers was cut down, and the salaries and the school funds were seriously curtailed, and the system weakened. The Triple K was rampant in Alabama. In one district, 6 churches were burned by incendiaries before the election of 1870. Many schoolhouses were burned between 1868 and 1871, and there were 371 cases of violence, including 35 murders. The planters and poor whites, after their first enmity, earlier made alliances in Alabama, and their concentrated social weight. Their concentrated, social weight descended on whites who dared to vote with black people. Such persons were warned and attacked until they fled the state or made peace with the new masters. Later, Northern capital poured into the poor white belt to develop coal and iron. Convicts labor was widely used, and exploitation developed, with labor divided by race and helplessness. In this it is absolutely essential, declared a great Black convention in Montgomery, December 1874, to our protection in our civil and political rights. The law of the United States shall be enforced so as to compel respect and obedience for them. Before the state laws, the state court, we are utterly helpless. The force fact we're failing, and to black people, and to black people, the question presents by the failure of their execution was rather his constitutional right as a citizen were to be, quote, a reality or a mockery, a protection, and a boon, or a danger and a curse, end quote. Rather they were to be, quote, freemen in fact or only in name. Rather the last two amendments of to the Constitution were to be, quote, practically enforced or to become nullities and stand only as dead letters on a statute books. The state of Georgia had in 1790 52,886 whites and 29,662 black people. The increase was rapid, but fairly uniform up until 1850, when there were 384,613 black people and 521,572 whites. And in 1860, this had increased to 465,698 black people and 591,550 whites. There were in 1860, 33,500 free black people in the state. The asset of the state of Georgia in 1860 included $600 million of taxable property, besides stock in the banks and railroads amounting to about $800,000. The state debt in 1861 included nearly $15 million worth of currency, came at a total of $18,035,775. Georgia lost 40,000 of its white population during the war. Georgia clung to slavery. Howell Cobb wrote in June 1865, quote, "The institutions of slavery, in my judgment, provided the best labor system that could ever devise for the black race. He had his capital invested in thousands of black people and hundreds of acres of land in middle of southeastern Georgia. In 1866, there was a sufficient migration of black people from Georgia to the west to cause some alarm. Georgia Land and Immigration Company was formed in 1865 with encouraged white immigrants. It was not successful. Some who came demanded better wages and were dissatisfied with the food. The project was given up. By May 1866, 1,200 citizens of Georgia had received special pardons from the president under the $20,000 exemption clause. And as early as 1865 and 1866, there were evident in Georgia a transition of leadership from the old landed aristocracy to the new commercial class, the changing of bourgeois rule. In June, James Johnson, a lawyer in Columbus, was appointed provisional governor of Georgia instead of Joshua Hill, who had been strongly urged and had urged himself. Former Governor Brown had summoned the state legislature, acting on the assumption that the state was already restored. The state legislature was prevented from assembling by military order, and Brown resigned the governorship. He had, however, great influence with Andrew Johnson and, quote, may have been one of the influences of that changed Johnson from severe to moderate measures towards the rebels. Election for the convention were held in October 1865. Nearly 300 delegates assembled in Milledgeville, of whom the great majority were insufficient men. They were, quote, a conservative body, unprogressive, mostly old men and rising politicians. This convention repealed but refused to nullify the ordinance of secession and abolished slavery with a proviso that, quote, this acquiescence in the action of the government of the United States is not intended to operate as a relinquishment, waiver, or estoppel of such claim and compensation or loss sustained by reason of the emancipation of his slaves, as any citizen of Georgia many hereafter make upon the justice and magnanimity of that government. The convention adjourned, and in November election, C.J. Jenkins was elected governor after Alexander Stephens, a former governor Brown had refused to be candidates. The legislature convened in Milledgeville in December 1865 and elected two leading former Confederates, Alexander Stephens and H.V. Johnson, as senators. President Johnson warned Governor Johnson and Joshua Hill greatly desired the place. The New York Times regretted that two men had been selected, apparently because of their prominence in the rebellion. The first work of the legislature was a series of 11 laws which formed the Black Code. Georgia, however, under ex-Governor Brown's advice, was more careful than the other states and listened to the storm of criticism against other black codes. The Black Code contained an apprentice law in the usual form, a vagrancy law with heavy penalties, various alterations to the penal laws, a law about the inciting of labor. Civil rights were established for black people, giving them the right to testify in court, but only where people of color were concerned. I'm trying to burp. Every children of color hereafter born was declared the legitimate child of his mother, and also of his father of color, if acknowledged by that father. Alexander Stephens suggested extending the franchise up to black people after he had reached a certain cultural standard and required an amount of wealth, but no one paid the slightest attention to this proposal. The 14th Amendment was rejected in 1866 unanimously in both houses. In the summer of 1867, Toombs suddenly returned from Europe, where he had been hiding. He declared, quote, I regret nothing in the past, but the dead and the failure. I am ready today to use my best means and I can command to establish the principles for which I fought. The black people early began to organize. Meetings were held in Macon and in Savannah, and particularly large conventions was assembled in Augusta in 1866 before the Reconstruction legislation. There were over 100 delegates from 18 counties. James Porter was elected president, and the convention went on record as not asking universal suffrage, but advocating property and educational tests as qualifications for the right to vote. It appointed a board of looking after the education of black people within the state, and finally formed itself into a body to be called the Equal Rights Association of Georgia. The platform of the association sought to inculcate principles of honesty, industry, and sobriety among black people, and a kindly feeling towards former masters. Ugh. Black people were advised to work hard, to learn to read and to write, and to buy homes. There were two other important resolutions passed. One, that the coastland held by black people were not to be regarded as territories, and that land was not to be confiscated from its owners. And the other that the Georgian legislature should have equal rights to black people before the courts. Another meeting was held in Macon, March 26, 1867, 2 months after the Reconstruction Act. The Macon Telegraph carried a long account of this gathering. The meeting was to be held at the Second Baptist Church of Color. They said it the other way, but I can't say it that way because it's, yeah. But this was not large enough, and it convened at the grove near Rose Henry Cemetery. Here, a huge platform was erected for the speaker, federal office officials, and school teachers. There were speeches by white and people of color men, and the processions carried banners. On one banner was the inscription, quote, as we have got to live and vote together in one state, let us be friends. This was followed by another meeting in Savannah on the platform of ex-Governor Johnson, several Army officers, and 3 men of color. Ex-Governor Johnson was made president. 5 resolutions were passed, recognizing the power of Congress and enfranchisement of people of color, the education of the whole people as the highest importance, and early registration and elections for the convention. Whew. Hope everybody's doing all right. The last of this series of meetings was held in Augusta with an attendance of 1,000 people. Again, ex-Governor Johnson was the principal speaker, but the meeting was not quite as harmonious as the former meeting. In the other meetings, there had been evidently a careful attempt to reconcile the desire of the white and people of color. But in this meeting, the wishes of the people of color were more frankly impressed. A resolution asked for equal political rights and the abolition of corporal punishment. White papers reported that, quote, many intelligent men of color approved of the spirit of the resolution. But this was evidently white propaganda. When the military reconstruction of Georgia was ordered by General Pope, General Jenkins went to Washington to seek an injunction before the Supreme Court on the part of the Senate of Georgia against the Secretary of War, General Grant and General Pope. His petition was dismissed May 13th for want of jurisdiction. Jurisdiction. Later, the governor returned to Washington carrying the Great Seal of the state and about $400,000 in cash, which disappeared. He filed a bill of complaint in the Supreme Court against General Grant, General Maids, and others for illegal seizure of the property of the state, and again asked for the injunction, but was unsuccessful. General Pope gave black people the right to serve in juries in August, and in January he was removed by President Johnson, and General Meade substituted. In the registration under the Reconstruction law, 39,457 black people registered and 95,214 whites. This meant that the whites were registering in spite of the advance of leading men like Ben Hill, Joseph Brown, and on the other hand, concealed with the whites not to let the newcomer and black people sweep on to victory unopposed, and Brown's advice was evidently followed. Notwithstanding this, 24,000 black people were persuaded to or intimidated to not vote, and 60,000 whites did not take part. While it is often stated that the great mass of white people were debarred by the Reconstruction Act, it is notable in Georgia that the average vote before the war was 102,585, while the registration of whites was 92,214. Thus those debarred from registering were estimated between 7,000 and 10,000. The convention met in Atlanta on December 9th, 1876, and sat until the mid of March 1868. Of the 169 delegates to the convention, 37 were black people, 9 were white carpetbaggers, and 12 conservative whites. The great majority then were white. This convention, therefore, was not controlled by the carpetbaggers and black people, but by whites. They said native, but I don't like using it. White people are not native here. A reporter of the Savannah News, December 14th, 1867, declared that, quote, black people in the convention appeared well dressed and well behaved, with few exceptions. The convention was interested in suffrage, qualifications for office holding, relief, and a liberal constitution. In these matters, black people took active part in the discussion and used their political privilege intelligently and with caution. Among the most members of color of this meeting were Aaron A., Bradley, Tunis George, Campbell, J.B. Custon, Henry McNeil Turner. Bradley was a fighter and acted both Democrats and Republicans and attacked both Democrats and Republicans when they tried to coerce black people. He was therefore given much publicity as a dangerous and undesirable black person who would cause trouble. Bradley was a person of color. A colorful and eventful career. Had a colorful and eventful career, and was a man of great eloquence. And black people could not be made to those confidence in him. He attacked radical discrimination on public carriers and requested the general in command to have the jails and prisons examined so as to release persons unlawfully deprived of their liberties. Bradley left the convention because of charges that he had deceived black people on the island of the coast of Savannah. As a matter of fact, he was trying to protect their land, and they had so much confidence in him that they sent him back as senator in 1888. Turner was the most prominent of black people. He was born in South Carolina in 1833. He was appointed chaplain in the Army. Hold on, I gotta do a picture. Puzzle piece. A chaplain in the Army by President Lincoln. He was a preacher in the African M.E. Church, of which he eventually became bishop. In 1865, he was appointed to a Freedmen's Bureau in Georgia. He traveled over the whole state, and when he became a part of the Republican organization in 1867, as well known for his speeches in all parts of Georgia, Turner was not liked by the whites. The Atlanta Intelligencer called him an unscrupulous fellow, shrewd enough to deceive the poor, deluded black people. He had to withstand all sorts of attempts to involve him in difficulties. He had that the whites accused him, quote, of every crime in the catalog of villainy. I have even been arrested and tried on the wildest and most groundless accusations ever distilled from the laboratory of hell. He was acquitted, however, in every case. Turner, nevertheless, sought to win the confidence of the conservatives. He tried to prevent the sale of property on which owners were unable to pay taxes, and he introduced a resolution from the relief of banks. Both these passed the convention. He desired civil rights, did not wish the downfall of the aristocracy. There was enthusiasm in his effort to secure pardon for Jefferson Davis. He tried to secure internal improvements by state action rather than by private companies. As a member of the Educated Committee, he sought to insert provisions that 5 years after a common school system had come into full operation, no person on becoming 21 years of age should vote unless he possessed an educational qualification. Another black leader was Tunis Campbell. He was born in Massachusetts, came south as an agent of the Freedmen's Bureau. He first established himself on an island off the coast of Savannah, where he established his own government. An armed force was necessary to remove him. He then went to Darien, where he acquired wide control over black people and virtually ruled them. In the Constitutional Convention, he was particularly interested in relief, seeking unsuccessfully to abolish imprisonment for debt. The convention prohibited slavery, established a single citizen without discrimination, and gave the right to vote to all males born or naturalized in the United States and resident in Georgia 6 months. Classist? I don't know. It doesn't seem like it right now. I don't know. Maybe. In laying down qualification for voters, it was said especially that all voters should be eligible to office. This stipulation was afterwards stricken out by an almost unanimous vote on the ground that it was unnecessary. This was probably a trick engineered by ex-Governor Brown for elections purpose. It was the basis of the subsequent expulsion of men of color from the legislature. In the Constitution, a general system of education free to all children of the state was provided. There was no attempt to disqualify Confederates from office beyond the demands of the Reconstruction Acts. The convention devoted much of its effort at first towards relief from taxes, foreclosures, execution of debt for debt, etc. On April 20th, 1868, the Constitution was adopted by a majority of 17,699 votes, and Rufus B. Bullock was elected governor. Bullock was usually classed as a carpetbagger, but he had lived in Georgia before the war and served as an officer in the Confederate Army. In the election of 1868, the Democratic conservatives attacked the Constitution because they claimed that it established social, political, and educational equalities for whites and black people, and that it would result in depreciation of property and a fearful increase of taxation. They declared it was framed by adventurers, convicts, and ignorant black people. Both parties appealed to the poor whites, the conservatives through race prejudice, and the Republicans by class prejudice. One of the latter appeals was, be a man, let the slaveholding or aristocracy no longer rule you. Vote for a constitution which educates your children, free from charge, relieves the poor debtor from his rich creditors, allows a liberal homestead for his family, and more than all, places you on a level with those who used to boast that for every slave there were entitled to 3/5 of a vote in congressional representation. Ponder this well before you vote. James Baldwin did not support people of color. Firm of Allison Walker, patriot. Okay, sweet. Thank you for the information. The result of the election was mixed. But the conservative Democrats had 17 of the 44 members of the Senate and 88 of the 170 members of the House. There was evidence of fraud and intimidation of black people in many counties where black people were in the majority. And the electoral vote of the state was given to Seymour. In this legislature, 3 black people were elected to Senate and 29 of the House. Bullock was installed as governor June 28th, but he complained to military commanders that many men ineligible to office under the 14th Amendment were seated in the legislature. Look at the background. What's the background say? The legislature investigated, but finally found none eligible. The 14th Amendment was ratified by 21st. Georgia was duly restored to the Union by the Omnibus Bill passed by Congress June 25th, were seated in the House, but senators were elected too late to take their seats before Congress adjourned. The book is on the background. Yeah, book's in the background, guys. Just as soon as congressional powers was withdrawn, the Georgian legislature turned upon its black members, of whom they were 3 in the Senate and 29 in the House. Their presence was an offense. Former Governor Brown had maintained during the campaign that black people were not eligible to office, and the conservatives immediately took up the question, citing ex-Governor Brown's opinion, and asked investigation. Led by Milton Calderon, a white Democrat senator, a movement was started to declare that since black people were not citizens, they could not hold office. What do you think? I don't know. Tell me what you think. Remind me. I read so much already. There was a long, heated discussion. Bradley, one of the black senators, argued forcibly and ably in the Senate on the black eligibility, and after his speech, it was moved that Chandler's resolution be expunged from the minutes. Later, Bradley own eligibility to his seat was attacked because of an alleged previous criminal conviction in New York. A majority of the special committee, all white men, sustained the accusation, but the minority declared that the evidence was incomplete. Nevertheless, Bradley was not allowed to defend himself and resigned. Thereupon, in September, the effort was continued to declare Campbell and Wallace, the 2 senators of color, ineligible. That the black people were given 1 hour for defense. After vigorous debate, the 3 senators of color were expelled by a vote of 24-11. The following protest was sent by Wallace and Campbell. We claim to be the legally elected representatives of a large portion of a nearly 1.5 of the legal electors of the Senate of Georgia. Sir, the Constitution and the law of Georgia strictly provides that no law shall be made or enforced which shall abridge and privileges our immunities of citizens of the United States or of this state, or deny it to any persons within its jurisdictions the equal protection of its laws. Therefore, on behalf of ourselves, our constituents, and also on behalf of nearly 500,000 loyal citizens of this state, we do enter our solemn protest against the illegal, unconstitutional, unjust, and oppressive action of this body based upon the resolution of the senators from the 35th senatorial districts declaring us ineligible on account of color. In the House, the resolution was introduced in August and passed in September by a vote of 83 to 23. Black people refused to vote. Four of the members of color who were so white that their black blood could not be proven, oh my gosh, were permitted to remain. They were Beard, Bletcher, Davis, and Falyall. Turner made an elaborate defense of the right of black people to hold office. Cases may be found where men have been deprived of their rights for crimes and misdemeanors, but it has remained for the Senate of Georgia in the very heart of the 19th century to call a man before the bar and there charge him with an act for which he is no more responsible than for the head which he carries upon his shoulders. The Anglo-Saxon race, sir, is the most surprising one. No man has ever been more deceived in that race than I have been for the last 3 weeks. I was not aware that there was in the character of that race so much cowardice or so much, oh my gosh, pusillanimity. Black people is their charge with holding office. Why, sir? Black people never wanted office. I recollect when we wanted candidates for the Constitutional Convention. We went from door to door in the Black Belt and begged white men to run. Some promised to do so, and yet, on the very day of election, many of them first made known their determination not to comply with their promises. They told the black men everywhere that they would rather see them run, and it was this encouragement of the white men that induced men of color to place his name upon the ticket as a candidate for the convention. In many instances, these white men voted for us. It is very strange if white men can occupy on this floor a seat created for people of color votes, and a black man cannot do it. Why, gentlemen, is it the most short-sighted reasons in the world? Hold on a second. Oh my gosh, dude, I don't know. In Congress was simply given a merely insufficient civil and political rights. It made me a mere political slave for Democrats or anybody else, giving them the opportunity to jump on my back in order to leap into political power. I do not thank Congress for it. Never, so help me God, shall I be a political slave. You have all the elements of superiority upon your side. You have our money and your own. You have our education and your own. You have our land and your own, too. We who number hundreds of thousands of Georgians, include our wives and family, will not a foot of land to call their own. Strangers in the land of our birth, without money, without education, without aid, without roofs to cover us while we live, nor sufficient clay to cover us when we die. It is extraordinary that a race such as yours professes gallantry, chivalry, education, and superiority, living in a land where ringing chimes call children and serve to the church of God, and a land where Bibles are read and gospel truths are spoken, and where courts of justice were presumed to exist. It is extraordinary to say that with all these advantages on our side, you can make war upon the poor, defenseless black man. I don't know. I haven't read too much on C.J. Walker, so I wouldn't know. And this is my first book reading Du Bois, so this speech was not printed in the minutes of the legislature, but issued as a pamphlet in Augusta the same year. In September 1868, the legislature declared all men of color members ineligible, people of color members ineligible, and it then proceeded to put in their seats the persons who had received the the next largest number of votes. The outrage of the Triple K on black people and whites became widespread. Bullock protested and appealed to Congress, citing that members of the legislature had not all taken the test oath. Bullock's letter was accompanied by a memorial of the Convention of People of Color held in Macon on Macon, Georgia. Macon, Georgia. The Republicans brought the case to the state Supreme Court in June 1869. Two of the three judges decided that the black people were eligible. Immediately there came the question as to whether this decision affected the legislator. Alexander Stephens and many others thought it did not. Black people immediately began a movement to reseat their members. A close convention was held in Macon, with 136 delegates, many of whom walked for tens of 40 miles to attend the meeting. The Constitution said that there were, quote, venomous and incendiary speeches, but these largely unlettered men went about to do their own work of recovery of their privileges in extraordinary practical ways. 82 counties were represented, and Turner presided. Reports of outrage and conditions were brought together and sent to Congress. Turner and Sims went to carry the report and relate their hardships before the Committee on Reconstruction. There was a disposition in Georgia to stand firm and not to reseat black people. Several papers advised the Assembly to persist in the attitude which it had adopted and to reset black people only under compulsion. In spite of such advice, Nelson Taft, Democrat representative elected to the Congress from the 2nd District, had pledged certain parties in Washington that Georgia would reseat men of color members and ratify the 15th Amendment if Congress did not interfere. This rumor ruined Taft's chance for the seat in Congress, for the Democrats said that they had not granted him such powers and never would do so, for they did not intend to reseat black people unless Congress should use force. Other way. Joshua Hill, one of the senators elected by Georgia's legislature in July, presented his credentials to the United States Senate December 7th, 1868. It was recommended that Hill be not admitted on the ground that Georgia had failed to comply with the Omnibus Act. In the House of Representatives, the Committee on Reconstruction was instructed to examine public affairs in Georgia. They took testimonies during January 1869, hearing Governor Bullock's James Sims, a preacher of color, H.M. Turner, and others. The lawlessness of the treatment of black people was emphasized, there being 260 cases of outrages between January and November. Meantime, there was a grave question as to whether Georgia's vote should be cast in the presidential election in 1868. It was finally decided that if Georgia's vote did not affect the results, the final vote should be announced in two ways, with or without the vote of Georgia. On technicalities, the members of the lower house who had already been representing Georgia were excluded, was not entitled to sit in the 41st Congress. Several bills concerning Georgia were introduced into Congress. Finally, in March 1869, when Georgia refused to ratify the 15th Amendment, a bill was passed, making the ratification of the 15th Amendment necessary before Georgia was admitted. The testimony as to the lawlessness of Georgia helped the passage of this bill, which became a law of December 27, 1869. Georgia thus came again under military authority, and all persons elected in the legislature were called to meet in a special session of General Meade. A legislature convened January 10th, and the test oath was administered under military supervision. The legislature ratified the 14th and 15th Amendments and not only recognized the 24th members of color, but paid them for lost time. There was thus a double expense for the salary of members that year, since both set of members were paid the white members on the motion of a senator of color. There was a question as to how long members of this legislature, originally elected in 1869, but stopped by the compulsion of members of color, should hold office, and many attempts were made to bribe members of the legislature to secure their votes for the greatest prolonging their terms. Wasn't the legislature in the history of black representation in Georgia after the Civil War? Nice. Georgia's members were minted in the third session of the 41st Congress, and Georgia entered their third and final stage of Reconstruction January 10th, 1870. And one member of color congressman from Georgia, Jefferson Long, 1869 to 1871, opposed removing Confederate disabilities. Speaking of the House, he said, February 1st, 1871, "What do those men say? Before their disabilities are removed, they say, we will remain quiet until all our disabilities are removed, and then we shall again take the lead. Why, Mr. Speaker, in my state, since emancipation, there have been over 500 loyal men shot down by a disloyal men there, and not one of those who took part in committing those outrages has ever been brought to justice. Do we then really propose here today, when the country is not ready for it, when those disloyal people still hate this government, when loyal men dare not carry the stars and stripes through our streets, for if they do, they will be turned out. They will be turned out of employment to relieve from political disabilities the very men who have committed these Ku Klux outrages. I think that I am doing my duty to my constituents of my country when I vote against any such propositions." Oh, so many burps. The parties in Georgia were now three: the conservatives, who represented the former planters, the scallywags, and the carpetbaggers, or radicals, who stood together as a commercial capitalist group, and a moderate group who held the balance of power. The legislature of 1868 was evenly divided between conservatives and radicals in the Senate, but the House had a majority of the conservatives, and after the exclusion of members of color, the conservatives had a majority in both 25 to 19 in the Senate, 127 to 48 in the House. So that just doesn't give them power. When the legislature was recognized in 1870, the radicals had a majority of both House, 27 to 17 in the Senate, 87 to 83 in the House. In the election of 1871, the moderates threw their power to the conservatives, and the combination gained 2/3 of the seat. Black people in Georgia legislature introduced numbers of bills. Senator Campbell not only introduced bills for education, but on the jury system in regard to churches, concerning the city governments of Savannah and of Reedville, on pleading and practice in the courts on better government of cities and towns. Most of these were reported back by various committees with recommendations that they pass. The number of black members was reduced to 26 by the death of Representative Limpkin of Macon County. He had spoke little, but his vote could not be counted on always four worthy bills. Although several of the members of the General Assembly of 1868 and 1870 had died, in no case was the resolution and eulogy was so pronounced as that in concern Limkin, we cheerfully record our appreciation of his modest worth, his integrity as a man of a citizen and a representative. Turner introduced the following bills. Can you tell I'm starting to get establish a police state, a state police, to secure chaplains for convicts, to enforce an act donating lands to the Georgia State Orphans House, to amend the Constitution of Georgia so as to enable females to vote, to appropriate the state capitol and the governor's mansion at Mildeville, to educational proposals, to repeal an act, to amend the several acts now in force regulating the fees and magistrates and constables in the state of Georgia, so far as relates to the counties of Bibb, Richmond, and Monroe, and Lee, and to provide for the mode of collecting the same approved January 22nd, 1852, and the several acts adminatory therefore, and to prescribe the cost in insolvent cases due magistrates and constables in that state, to add an additional section to the 9th division of the penal code, also a bill declaring certain persons husbands and wives. Beep. I said beep. Turner's resolution extended sympathies to inhabitants of Richmond, Virginia, who had just suffered a terrible disaster, was adopted by the House. Black people in the General Assembly seem to have had a special interest in correcting the methods of maintaining and managing the penitentiary of this state. Representative Turner offered several resolutions for reform in the system. This penitentiary system began to characterize the whole South. In Georgia, at the outbreak of the Civil War, there were about 200 white felons confined to Milledgeville. There were no black convicts since under discipline of slavery. Hold on. No, under discipline of slavery, black people were punished on the plantation. The white convicts were released to fight in the Confederate armies. The whole criminal system came to be used as a method to keep black people at work and intimidating them. Consequently, there began to be a demand for jails and penitentiaries beyond the natural demand due to the rise of crime. Federal officials began the custom of leasing the convicts to private prisons for work. The system was extended by Bullock for leased 500 victims to a firm of contractors. The legislature of 1871 confirmed this lease, and in 1876, the Democrats hastened to order a 20-year lease of convicts, which began the horrible system of convict leasing and gave to the state a profit in crime, not to mention the vast profits which came to private contractors. Naturally, then, members of color of the legislature, even before this system was settled, were interested in securing better conditions for convicts. Senator George Wallace and Representative James Sims served on a joint committee from the Senate and the House respectively to ascertain the number of inmates and how they were treated. Peter O'Neill offered a bill of abolishment of the penitentiary system. As a result of this movement, changes were made in a drastic method used to punish convicts. This amelioration led to the issuing of many pardons, for which Bullock's administration was severely criticized. The most energetic black person on the standing committee on the penitentiary investigation was Representative J.M. Sims of Chatham County. Sorry. Yeah, you too. Thank you. I had spoken only twice in 1868 On his return to the General Assembly of 1870, Sims offered many bills to amend an act for the more efficient preservation of peace and good order on election day in this state, to repeal an act prohibiting the sales and purchases of agricultural products in the counties of Lundaus and Macon, and cooperates with Chatham Mercantile Loan and Trust Companies to repeal the act passed in 1869 to encourage immigration into the state, to repeal the local laws of Savannah and Chatham County as far as relates to the fees and costs of justice and peace, notaries and ex officios, justice and constables in crime cases and warrants, to provide for a reopening of the books of registration by the clerk and the common council of the city of Savannah. Sorry, I'm delayed. All right, real quick, I'm going to go ahead and see how close we are. Putting a bookmark as soon as I can find it. 5:58. I'm just going to look ahead. Okay, 5:58. Nope. Nope. I don't have any stopping points. I'm already at 570. Looks like I have to. Oh, yep. The next stop I have is at 579. All right, let's go back. All right, here we go. 2 of these bills passed, and the last two were indefinitely postponed. Representative Porter was prominent. He was born in Charleston, South Carolina, of free parents. Before the war, he was a member of the Underground Railroad, and he opened a secret school in his home. He was a music teacher and a tailor by trade. In 1856, he had won some distinctions in music, which led the bishop of the Episcopal Church of Savannah to have him to come there to train a choir for the St. Stephen's Episcopal Church. After the war between the states, Porter opened an 8th grade private school, and later on he was called to the principal of the first black public school in Savannah. He left this position to become the first principal in the public school of Thomasville, Georgia. While there, he published his first book, English Grammar for Beginners. Finally, he became principal of the school of Yazoo, Mississippi. Porter was especially prominent in the Black Convention, which preceded the State Convention in 1867. Jefferson Long was sent to Congress from Georgia. He was born in Crawford County in 1836, educated himself, and went into business as a merchant tailor of Macon, Georgia. He was elected a representative from Georgia to the 41st Congress by a majority of 900 over Lawton, a Democrat. He was admitted to his seat January 16th, 1871. The record of a black person in the Georgia legislature is credible, and yet Clarl Howell afterwards declared black members of this legislature were unlettered, ignorant politicians who seemed to stack of puppets and harlequins and oh my gosh, he's horrible. This dude's horrible. Outrage and guerrilla warfare against black people were widespread in Georgia. General Lewis, a Freedmen's Bureau, reported 260 attacks, whipping, and murders of freedmen between January and November 1868. In September, there was a race riot at Camellia, Nordhoff found about 1875 that black people in the near cities and towns were usually prosperous. There are many mechanics of color. They received full wages where they were skillful. Near Atlanta and other places, they only they owned small truck farms and supplied the market with vegetables. They were fewer black than white beggars. And in the cities, and missionary clergymen surprised me by the remark that the blackberry crop was which was ripening was, quote, a blessing of a dozen to dozens of poor white family whom he knew, who lived half the year, he said, in a condition of semi-starvation. There are many mechanics of color, and they are all thrifty people, and very commonly owned the houses they live in, and often a town lot beside in the cotton country, and an increasing number of men of color own farms and from 40 to 100 acres. But many of these were free before the war. In the towns and villages, people of color have a prosperous look. They dress neatly and very commonly live in frame houses. On the whole, their conditions appear to me very comfortable and satisfactory. He gives these facts. Almost done, guys. An official report of the Comptroller General of the state for 1874, given the character and value of a property and among the taxes returned by taxpayer of color for that year, a number of people of color polls listed in 83,318. These returns are aggregated values of taxable property amounting to $6,157,798, on which they actually paid $30,788 in taxes. They owned 338,769 acres of agriculture, land, and cities and town properties to the amount of $1,200,115. Now, remember that these people were slaves only 9 years before. I think it clearly establishes that, first, they have labored with credible industry and perseverance, and second, they have been fairly protected in the rights of life and property by the democratic rulers of the state. I do not think that people of color in any other state I have visited own half as much real estate, or indeed a quarter as much as those of Georgia. They're going to stop there, everybody. Do 559. Do. Now, I don't think Joe can talk. Thanks for the. Oh, you can talk. Look at you.
Okay, so apparently my other headphones don't work.
Okay. You gonna say something? Are you there? Hello? You just cut out again. You're not talking. Nope, nothing. Still nothing. Yep, we lost you again, Joe. We heard you for like a second, and then boom, you got lost. I'll come in after I'm done, and I'll listen to what you have to say. All right. But it looks like that they're just trying to like give less power to black people as usual, you know? Oh, the baby's laying down? Okay, never mind. So as usual, black people are being put in positions to serve the white interests. And even when they get put into power, they get taken out due to the scary part of having black people in high places. Did you say something? Say something again. No, no, it just comes in and out. Uh, so, but yeah, I mean, like, it's just more. Oh well, I know. Oh well. But anyways, everybody, I'm gonna go ahead and close it out. I'm gonna take my time to kind of soak all this in, simulate it, and then talk differently with someone else. All right, everybody. I wish you a good night. Come back to us, Joe.